Hi. Yeah, it's Quojo. It's close
Kwodwo.
enough.
Sorry.
Yeah. Was there some sort of prompt, or should I just kind of follow the same kind of path that everyone else followed?
Yep.
Okay. Um, my name's Quojo. I graduated with a degree in philosophy back in 2017. Was at Cal State East Bay back in 2012. And for me, my kind of my journey through um through the degree and afterwards doesn't actually start in school. It starts before. A lot of my time as a youth was spent kind of learning different skills and using kind of my interest in science and tech and history and all this other stuff. Like I worked in a store with my parents. I had all these different things that I did, and I think that that's really important because a lot of the times I've found that marrying the things that I learned from my philosophical studies, right, from the classes that I took with, Dr. Moore and Dr. Dirksen, Dr. Hall, really kind of added a lot of value to the way I approach the work that I do. Um, so I'll go into that directly. So right now I work for an organization called the Silicon Valley Urban Debate League. I am not in grad school. I kind of had to, after graduating, figure out, how am I going to make money? How am I going to pay for things? So on and so forth. So um, there was a lot of angst on my part trying to think about how do I get a job um, when I have a philosophy degree, right? Like most people, they hear you say philosophy, like what? My family, my aunt's philosophy. What are you going to do with that? That's the first thing my aunt asked me. And I felt pressure to kind of have an answer for her because she was part of the reason why I was even out here in California. And so what I realized over time is that one of the best things um, about the experience of like going through your studies in an undergrad in philosophy is that you're really forced to to choose. Like you you could just go through and take whatever class you wanted, but it was kind of your choice, right? Like if you wanted to do focus on religious philosophy, if you wanted to focus on philosophy of science, if you wanted to focus on um, philosophy of history, social sciences, social studies, all of these different things, you're kind of picking that, and in doing so, you're picking what you are most interested in, and that's something that I've found is really important in the working world is being proactive about choosing what it is that you are interested in, making it known what you are good at, and having a really good way of understanding um, how to apply the things that you learned in school in work. So I'll talk about what I do. So I work at an organization that's a part of a national kind of group of organizations that's focused on providing access to speech and debate um, and professional development and access to law to like the legal pipeline and so on and so forth. So we have some people here who are lawyers. So I'm sure y'all know that they're, or not lawyers, but going into law. I'm sure you know that there's kind of this big push within the field of law to kind of be more diverse. And it's been that way for a while, to have more diversity, more involvement of people because they see it as like a competitive edge. Um, I've been involved in that for the past 2023. It's going on 6 years. And I do a lot of different things, and I use the skills that I've gained in philosophy in those things. I've used the skills that I kind of developed on my own outside of philosophy, like as a child as well, and I've found ways to merge them. So I'll be specific. First, like Dolores, I work directly with kids. I work directly with teenagers, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, to teach them how to go from a state where they have no interest in talking and presenting and speaking, and get them to think about things critically, to get them to think about things from as many perspectives as they can, not so that they can accept the perspectives, but so that they can figure out what they think and what and how they feel about it. And so a lot of the times I'll have to find things to talk about or things to pique their interest and talk about them in an interesting way. This is something that Dr. Dirksen would always say in his class, like, what's interesting? Choose what's interesting. Find what's interesting. And I would always be like, okay, like, why is he always talking about interesting? This is, like, what's really that interesting about this? And what I realized is, it's not so much the thing itself that you're like that's interesting. It's how you approach it. So in the business world, in the working world, a lot of times people will get into routines. They'll get into routines, and they'll kind of forget that, like, it's not just a job, because somebody is experiencing the work that you do from the perspective of, if not a consumer, a partner, or there's some benefit to someone. And so um, you have to make yourself stand out, whether it's you have to make yourself stand out to your manager, you may have to make yourself stand out to your coworkers, and the clients and the customers that you serve, and finding interesting ways to approach problems that other people have, finding interesting ways to talking about them with rigor and also with empathy, is really important. So a lot of the times I'll have students who have no interest in talking or doing any speech or debate related things. And so I try to approach the way that I encourage them to talk and I encourage them to speak in a very empathetic way, but with some level of critical thinking, in the sense that, okay, if I notice that a student is like, they like to talk about things that they like to talk about, I'll talk to them about the things that they like to talk about one on one. I'll get them involved in a broader conversation. I'll like approach the issues that they care about that seem really silly in an interesting way, so that they see, okay, I don't have to be boring. I don't have to be, fuddy duddy, like, um, there's this idea that the academy is really ivory tower, and it has nothing to do with people's lived experiences, and this can be true. And a lot of students share that feeling. They don't have the words to describe it, but that's their feeling. And so knowing how to kind of code switch and flip through these different modes of thinking is really helpful. And so that's one way I apply kind of the work that we do in undergrad, like, to the work that I do with students. The second thing is I work with teachers directly. I teach teachers how to do speech and debate, how to execute it in their classrooms, how to do recruiting, how to use debate and speech, uh, like, and assessments and so on and so forth. And so there's a lot of trying to figure out what their values are, what their concerns and priorities are, and a lot of troubleshooting. There's a lot of troubleshooting, and I don't think this is limited to my job. I think this is literally any job you take. There are going to be opportunities to troubleshoot, and most people don't want to do that. So if you take the skills that you've learned in philosophy, which require us to engage with things that we don't really understand, like, we don't understand them very much, and we're told, okay, here's a process you can use, right? Like, in the first year, like, if you're that's what you want to major in, first year you're like, okay, rhetoric, logic, and I don't remember what the name of the class is, but basically, like, here's how you approach um kind of problem solving and troubleshooting. Here's, like, formulas that we use, but these aren't the end all and be all. These are just ways of thinking and approaching these problems. If you take the things that you learn literally in that class and that you've applied throughout your time at school, and you mold your thinking and you mold the approach to the problems that you see happening in your job, people will notice. And it's not about them noticing in that moment, it's about them noticing the results of your application of these troubleshooting skills to it, because you're not going to get your flowers immediately, all the time. People are in their own heads, they've got their own things that are going on, but you will develop a sense of confidence, and you're going to develop a sense of, like, and it's not really assuredness, like, you'll feel more comfortable, and you can better advocate for not only the job that you have, but in future jobs, right? Like, hey, I did this, I took ownership of this, I solved this problem, and you can describe how you solve the problem, which is actually one of the most important things when you're working in a professional environment. Being able to describe how you solve the problem is like it's everything, because you would think if you tell people how you solve the problem, they'll be like, oh, okay, well, then I don't need you anymore. But that's actually not the case. What it actually is they want to know that you can replicate it and that you can continuously do it and be consistent. And so that's one of the, I think the biggest things that's helped is kind of harnessing and refining my problem solving skills as a, as a student. And last but not least, I do a lot of like big vision casting work. So I am responsible for managing our like and kind of building out our alumni network. I'm responsible for building out the database that we use. So I found a provider um, of data reporting services. And it took a lot of time. It took a lot of meetings. It took a lot of talking. I didn't know what I was doing. I had never done it before. Like I literally never did it before. So I approached it in the same way that I would approach kind of an assignment for a class. So the first thing was, all right, we have needs that we need to meet. We need to be able to generate reports for our board, to tell them how many students are participating in our activities, how many students are doing X things, how many students are involved in this activity for X amount of hours, so on and so forth. Lots of really deep questions. The provider that we had was not going to be able to continue providing that for us, and the solutions that they provided for us were ineffective. So the way I approached this was, the first thing I did was I did a bunch of research on what were the options that were out there. How do you go about figuring out how to set up something like this? Then I went and I talked to all of my coworkers. I had meetings one on one with them. I talked to my bosses, and I'm describing this because like you should think about like how do you take the same process that you use in school and apply it to the real world? So you take that kind of discovery period, then you take that period of, okay, let me talk to everyone and research. Then let me, as I'm going through, constantly critique what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And then I'm going to apply a kind of a heuristic to the solutions that exist. And so the same way that we move through our work in academia is really what you do in the world at large, in a professional space. And I think one of the most rewarding things that I've been working on is kind of drafting out what an alumni network looks like, because there's so much there that is really fraught ethically. Um, and I'll be very brief about this part. Um, Nonprofits um, exist in a really weird space where you have to justify your existence to people who are looking for um, a way to kind of feel good about themselves and the money that they're giving to the organization. They want to know that they're having the maximum impact for whatever dollars that they're giving. And people generally want to give to causes that are already successful or that seem like they're successful. And so in a lot of ways, you'll have this mission of wanting to try to solve for an issue in society, and um, you really care about that. And so you get caught up in the mission, and there's this like there's this blending of the mission and your own personal ethical and moral compass, right? And then what happens over time, and I've seen this happen a ton, is you realize that it's not as pure as you thought it was. The intentions that you have are not being reciprocated by the organization. This happens in the professional like workplace as well. Like I've had jobs where I thought I was going in to do a certain thing, and then you realize no, like the thing that the company is doing, the focus is different than what I thought it was. This always happens. And so trying to figure out how to continue to work with people and in an environment where you feel like you're not in alignment with your moral compass and your like what you consider to be the most important ethically, And having to tick the boxes off that please the donors, the shareholders, the boss, whatever, right? Doing that while also getting the shit, sorry, the stuff done that you really like, you really believe in, is an incredibly difficult process that I think most people are not equipped to deal with. That existential angst, that intense feeling of like what am I doing this for? What am I doing? Why am I doing this? Is something that most people don't think about. And we're lucky because, we have to deal with thoughts of nihilistic, dread all the time. And so like taking that, that approach and um, that thought process that from school and applying it to the work that you do is incredibly important. And I guess the last thing I'll say is don't get so caught up on what what can you do with a philosophy degree, right? Like you're gonna like a lot of times people are gonna ask you like, oh, what can you do with that? What are you gonna do with that? How are you gonna like do anything with that? Don't get so caught up on that. Think about what are the things that you're already interested in, what are the things that you already know how to do or that you really care about, um, and how can those be made valuable to some other group of people, or how can that further service something that you really care about and are interested in? Because your skills, the critical thinking skills, the research skills, the interrogation, the comfort with engaging with things that you literally have no idea about, you don't understand, that is going to enhance anything you do. It's not like you don't just have to do academic work. Academic work is brilliant, it's beautiful, it's lovely, but there is a significant amount of need for people who are willing to engage in the world, critically and with an open mind, um, in the professional world. And yeah, I think that's it.
That's